gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Smucker. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. Oversight is an important role of this committee of Congress. And when we know that there's at least 60 billion, lowest number, and perhaps hundreds of billions of dollars that were fraudulently given to others than those who deserved it, we should be evaluating that and looking at and seeing whether the administration did all they could to prevent that, and see whether this committee under Democrat leadership advocated their responsibility to provide that oversight. I'd like to use my time to respond to a few of the comments made by Democrats, starting with the ranking member, who I have a great deal of respect for. He opened with a fiery speech that conflated the idea that looking at fraud was the same as trying to prevent benefits from going to individuals who really needed a lifeline. And I say it's quite the opposite. And in fact, if another thing we heard was that there's a voice missing here, voices of families who benefited from those dollars, I think they would be appalled to know that as much potentially as for every dollar that they received in a lifeline went to someone that didn't receive it and will be paid either by them or by their kids and their grandkids, which is most likely. They would be appalled at that, and I think it would be important to have their input on that. I thought, based on the ranking member's comment, that he perhaps misunderstood the purpose of this hearing in conflating those two messages. And then as I listened further to other Democrat comments, I realized it was more than that. They were literally trying to say that Republicans, by holding a hearing of this sort, did not support helping individuals. And again, that's just not true. And they also said that we didn't vote for $2 billion worth of fraud prevention. And I'd like to remind Democrats that that was included in a bill of about $1,900 billion that we felt would do more harm than good. We were worried about the inflationary impact of that bill that would harm the American people far more than the handouts that have been provided. And by the way, we heard that from individuals, everyday Americans, in our first hearing, where individuals said that those inflationary pressures they have now are hurting their ability to provide for their families and are threatening their ability to be able to keep their businesses open. And I know this has been mentioned before, but I'll say it as well to the ranking member and the rest of the Democrats here. I thought it was very unfortunate that Democrats were unwilling to leave the bubble of Washington, D.C. and hear from real American people the impacts of our policies. And I appreciated that the chairman put together a field hearing, and I know we're doing more, and I hope that Democrats will reconsider, because I think it was a very, very valuable hearing, and I think it'd be worth all of us hearing that. By the way, we were right in the impacts of that $1.9 trillion ARPA. We had all first voted for the CARES Act. We felt it was absolutely important, but it led to the highest inflation rate in 40 years. We were right. And if you want to talk about Biden's economic policies, I read a newsletter this morning that I thought nailed it pretty well. You know, Biden came in and inherited an economy that was growing at 6.5% and an inflation rate of 1.5%, and somehow he was in 2 years successful at completely inverting those numbers. And we had 6.5% inflation in an economy that is barely growing. One additional point, and this goes back to something the ranking member said as well. He proposed the idea that people did not respond. Almost 40% of Pennsylvanians received more on unemployment than they could have earned going back to work. And he believed that people did not respond to that by staying home. And that I think, doesn't recognize the very nature, the very characteristic of human nature. We all tend to do what is right for ourselves. We look out for our best interests. And one of the arguments that we had as Republicans against ARPA is that we put people in this terrible position of needing to decide that if they went back to work, they would be less able to provide for their families. It's an awful position to put people in, and we don't fault anyone for taking taking advantage of what was available to them. But it was a bad decision on our part. We could have done far better, as we wanted to at that time, by incentivizing people to go back to work. One of the amendments that we had included on that bill, they were all rejected, but one was to provide a $1,500 bonus for people to go back to work. Think how that would have changed where we are right now. We heard directly at that hearing of individuals, of owners of businesses who talked directly to employees and said, we won't come back to work because we'd lose this benefit or that benefit. And I've talked to hundreds of employers who were in the same position. It was a badly guided decision that has harmed American people far more than the government handouts that were included with it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I'm over time.
Thank you, Representative. I'd like to